The Maze Runner by James Dashner. Chapter 1. He began his new life standing up, surrounded by cold darkness and stale, dusty air. Metal ground against metal. A lurching shudder shook the floor beneath him. He fell down at the sudden movement and shuffled backward on his hands and feet, drops of sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool air. His back struck a hard metal wall. He slid along it until he hit the corner of the room. Slinking to the floor, he pulled his legs up tight against his body, hoping his eyes would soon adjust to the darkness. With another jolt, the room jerked upward like an old lift in a mine shaft. Harsh sounds of chains and pulleys, like the workings of an ancient steel factory, echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls with a hollow, tinny whine. The lightless elevator swayed back and forth as it ascended, turning the boy's stomach sour with nausea. A smell like burnt oil invaded his senses, making him feel worse. He wanted to cry, but no tears came. He could only sit there, alone, waiting. My name is Thomas, he thought. That was the only thing he could remember about his life. He didn't understand how this could be possible. His mind functioned without flaw, trying to calculate his surroundings and his predicament. Knowledge flooded his thoughts, facts and images, memories and details of the world and how it works. He pictured snow on trees, running down a leaf-strewn road, eating a hamburger, the moon casting a pale glow on a grassy meadow, swimming in a lake, a busy square with hundreds of people bustling about their business. And yet, he didn't know where he came from, or how he'd gotten inside the dark lift, or who his parents were. He didn't even know his last name. Images of people flashed across his mind, but there was no recognition, their faces replaced with haunted smears of color. He couldn't think of one person he knew, or recall a single conversation. The room continued its ascent, swaying. Thomas grew immune to the ceaseless rattling of the chains that pulled him upward. A long time passed. Minutes stretched into hours, although it was impossible to know for sure because every second seemed an eternity. No? He was smarter than that. Trusting his instincts, he knew he'd been moving for roughly half an hour. Strangely enough, he felt his fear whisked away like a swarm of gnats caught in the wind, replaced by an intense curiosity. He wanted to know where he was and what was happening. With a groan and then a clonk, the rising room halted. The sudden change jolted Thomas from his huddled position and threw him across the hard floor. As he scrambled to his feet, he felt the room sway less and less until it finally stilled. Everything fell silent. A minute passed. 2. He looked in every direction, but he saw only darkness. He felt along the walls again, searching for a way out, but there was nothing, only the cool metal. He groaned in frustration. His echo amplified through the air, like the haunted moan of death. It faded, and silence returned. He screamed, called for help, pounded on the walls with his fists. Nothing. Thomas backed into the corner once again, folded his arms and shivered, and the fear returned. He felt a worrying shudder in his chest, as if his heart wanted to escape, to flee his body. "Somebody! Someone help me!" he screamed. Each word ripped his throat raw. A loud clank rang out above him, and he sucked in a startled breath as he looked up. A straight line of light appeared across the ceiling of the room, and Thomas watched as it expanded. A heavy grating sound revealed double sliding doors being forced open. After so long in the darkness, the light stabbed his eyes. He looked away, covering his face with both hands. He heard noises above, voices, and fear squeezed his chest. "Look at that shank. How old is he? Looks like a clunk in a t-shirt. You're the clunk, shuckface. Dude, it smells like feet down there. Hope you enjoyed the one-way trip, Greenie. Ain't no ticket back, bro." Thomas was hit with a wave of confusion, blistered with panic. The voices were odd, tinged with echo. Some of the words were completely foreign. Others felt familiar. He willed his eyes to adjust as he squinted toward the light and those speaking. At first, he could see only shifting shadows, but as they soon turned into the shapes of bodies, people bending over the light, over the hole in the ceiling, looking down on him, pointing. And then, as if the lens of a camera had sharpened its focus, the faces cleared. They were boys, all of them. Some young, some older. Thomas didn't know what he expected, but seeing those faces puzzled him. They were just teenagers, kids. Some of his fear melted away, but not enough to calm his racing heart. Someone lowered a rope from above, the end of it tied with a big loop. Thomas hesitated, then stepped into it with his right foot and clutched the rope as he was yanked toward the sky. Hands reached down, lots of hands, grabbed him by his clothes, pulled him up. The world seemed to spin, a swirling mist of faces and color and light. A storm of emotions wrenched his gut, twisted and pulled. He wanted to scream, cry, throw up. The chorus of voices had grown silent, but someone spoke as they yanked him over the sharp edge of the dark box. And Thomas knew he'd never forget the words. "Nice to meet you, Shank," the boy said. "Welcome to the Glade." Chapter 2. The helping hands didn't stop swarming around him until Thomas stood up straight and had the dust brushed from his shirt and pants. Still dazzled by the light, he staggered a bit. He was consumed with curiosity, but still felt too ill to look closely at his surroundings. His new companion said nothing as he swiveled his head around, trying to take it all in. As he rotated in a slow circle, the other kids snickered and stared. Some reached out and poked him with a finger. There had to be at least 50 of them, their clothes smudged and sweaty as if they'd been hard at work, all shapes and sizes and races, their hair of varying lengths. Thomas suddenly felt dizzy, his eyes flickering between the boys and the bizarre place in which he'd found himself. They stood in a vast courtyard, several times the size of a football field, surrounded by 4 enormous walls made of gray stone and covered in spots with thick ivy. The walls had to be hundreds of feet high and formed a perfect square around them, each side split in the exact middle by an opening as tall as the walls themselves that, from what Thomas could see, led to passages and long corridors beyond. "Look at the green beam," a scratchy voice said. Thomas couldn't see who it came from. "Gonna break his shuck, neckin' checking out the new digs." Several boys laughed. "Shut your hole, galley," a deeper voice responded. Thomas focused back on the dozens of strangers around him. He knew he must look out of it. He felt like he'd been drugged. A tall kid with blonde hair and a square jaw sniffed at him, his face devoid of expression. A short, pudgy boy fidgeted back and forth on his feet, looking up at Thomas with wide eyes. A thick, heavily muscled Asian kid folded his arms as he studied Thomas, his tight shirt sleeves rolled up to show off his biceps. A dark-skinned boy frowned, the same one who'd welcomed him. Countless others stared. "Where am I?" Thomas asked, surprised at hearing his voice for the first time in his salvageable memory. Didn't sound quite right, higher than he would have imagined. "Nowhere good," this came from the dark-skinned boy. "Just slim yourself nice and calm." "Which keeper he gonna get?" someone shouted from the back of the crowd. "I told you, shuckface," a shrill voice responded. "He's a clunk, so he'll be a slopper. No doubt about it." The kid giggled like he'd just said the funniest thing in history. Thomas once again felt a pressing ache of confusion. Hearing so many words and phrases that didn't make sense. Shank, shuck, keeper, slopper. They popped out of the boys' mouths so naturally it seemed odd for him not to understand. It was as if his memory loss had stolen a chunk of his language. It was disorienting. Different emotions battled for dominance in his mind and heart. Confusion, curiosity, panic, fear. But laced through it all was the dark feeling of utter hopelessness, like the world had ended for him, had been wiped from his memory and replaced with something awful. He wanted to run and hide from these people. The scratchy-faced boy was talking. "Even do that much. Bet my liver on it." Thomas still couldn't see his face. "I said, shut your holes," the dark boy yelled. "Keep yapping, and next break'll be cut in half." That must be their leader, Thomas realized. Hating how everyone gawked at him, he concentrated on studying the place the boy had called the Glade. The floor of the courtyard looked like it was made of huge stone blocks, many of them cracked and filled with long grasses and weeds. An odd, dilapidated wooden building near one of the corners of the square contrasted greatly with the gray stone. A few trees surrounded it, their roots like gnarled hands digging into the rock floor for food. Another corner of the compound held gardens. From where he was standing, Thomas recognized corn, tomato plants, fruit trees. Across the courtyard from there stood wooden pens holding sheep and pigs and cows. A large grove of trees filled the final corner. The closest ones looked crippled and close to dying. The sky overhead was cloudless and blue, but Thomas could see no sign of the sun despite the brightness of the day. The creeping shadows of the walls didn't reveal the time or direction. It could be early morning or late afternoon. As he breathed in deeply, trying to settle his nerves, a mixture of smells bombarded him. Freshly turned dirt, manure, pine, something rotten and something sweet. Somehow, he knew that these were the smells of a farm. Thomas looked back at his captors, feeling awkward but desperate to ask questions. Captors, he thought. Then, why did that word pop into my head? He scanned their faces, taking in each expression, judging them. One boy's eyes, flared with hatred, stopped him cold. He looked so angry, Thomas wouldn't have been surprised if the kid came at him with a knife. He had black hair, and when they made eye contact, the boy shook his head and turned away, walking toward a greasy iron pole with a wooden bench next to it. A multicolored flag hung limply at the top of the pole, no wind to reveal its pattern. Shaken, Thomas stared at the boy's back until he turned and took a seat. Thomas quickly looked away. Suddenly, the leader of the group, perhaps he was 17, took a step forward. He wore normal clothes, black t-shirt, jeans, tennis shoes, a digital watch. For some reason, the clothing here surprised Thomas. It seemed like everyone should be wearing something more menacing, like prison garb. The dark-skinned boy had short cropped hair, his face clean-shaven. But other than the permanent scowl, there was nothing scary about him at all. "It's a long story, Shank," the boy said. "Piece by piece, you'll learn. I'll be taking you on the tour tomorrow. Till then, just don't break anything." He held a hand out. "Name's Albie." He waited, clearly wanting to shake hands. Thomas refused. Some instinct took over his actions, and without saying anything, he turned away from Albie and walked to a nearby tree where he plopped down to sit with his back against the rough bark. Panic swelled inside him once again, almost too much to bear. But he took a deep breath and forced himself to try to accept the situation. Just go with it, he thought. You won't figure out anything if you give in to fear. "Then tell me," Thomas called out, struggling to keep his voice even. "Tell me the long story." Albie glanced at his friends closest to him, rolling his eyes, and Thomas studied the crowd again. His original estimate had been close. There were probably 50 or 60 of them, ranging from boys in their mid-teens to young adults like Albie, who seemed to be one of the oldest. At that moment, Thomas realized with a sickening lurch that he had no idea how old he was. His heart sank at the thought. He was so lost, he didn't even know his own age. "Seriously," he said, giving up on the show of courage. "Where am I?" Albie walked over to him and sat down cross-legged. The crowd of boys followed and packed in behind. Heads popped up here and there, kids leaning in every direction to get a better look. "If you ain't scared," Albie said, "you ain't human. Act any different, and I'd throw you off the cliff because it'd mean you're a psycho." "The cliff?" Thomas asked, blood draining from his face. "Shuck it," Albie said, rubbing his eyes. "Ain't no way to start these conversations, you get me? We don't kill shanks like you here, I promise. Just try and avoid being killed. Survive, whatever." He paused, and Thomas realized his face must have whitened even more when he heard that last part. "Man," Albie said, then ran his hands over his short hair as he let out a long sigh. "I ain't good at this. You're the first green bean since Nick was killed." Thomas's eyes widened. and another boy stepped up and playfully slapped Albie across the head. "Wait for the bloody tour, Albie," he said, his voice thick with an odd accent. "Kid's gonna have a buggin' heart attack. Nothing even been heard yet." He bent down and extended his hand toward Thomas. "Name's Newt, Greenie, and we'd all be right cheery if you'd forgive our clunk for brains new leader here." Thomas reached out and shook the boy's hand. He seemed a lot nicer than Albie. Newt was taller than Albie, too, but looked to be a year or so younger. His hair was blonde and cut long, cascading over his t-shirt. Veins stuck out of his muscled arms. "Pipe it, shuckface," Albie grunted, pulling Newt down to sit next to him. "At least he can understand half my words." There were a few scattered laughs, and then everyone gathered behind Albie and Newt, packing in even tighter, waiting to hear what they said. Albie spread his arms out, palms up. "This place is called the Glade, all right? It's where we live, where we eat, where we sleep. We call ourselves the Gladers. That's all you—" "Who sent me here?" Thomas demanded, fear finally giving way to anger. "How'd—" But Albie's hand shot out before he could finish, grabbing Thomas by the shirt as he leaned forward on his knees. "Get up, Shank! Get up!" Albie stood up, pulling Thomas with him. Thomas finally got his feet under him, scared all over again. He backed up against a tree, trying to get away from Albie, who stayed right in his face. "No interruptions, boy," Albie shouted. "Whacker, if we told you everything, you'd die right on the spot, right after you clunk your pants. Baggers drag you off, and you ain't no good to us then, are you?" "I don't even know what you're talking about," Thomas said slowly, shocked at how steady his voice sounded. Newt reached out and grabbed Albie by the shoulders. "Albie, lay off a bit. You're hurting more than helping, you know?" Albie let go of Thomas's shirt and stepped back, his chest heaving with breaths. "Ain't no time to be nice, Green Bean. Old life's over. New life's begun. Learn the rules quick. Listen, don't talk. You get me?" Thomas looked over at Newt, hoping for help. Everything inside him churned and hurt. The tears that had yet to come burned his eyes. Newt nodded. "Greenie, you get him, right?" He nodded again. Thomas fumed, wanting to punch somebody, but he simply said, "Yeah." "Good that," Albie said. "First day. That's what today is for you, Shank. Night's coming. Runners'll be back soon. The box came late today. Ain't got time for the tour. Tomorrow morning, right after the wake-up." He turned toward Newt. "Get him a bed. Get him to sleep." "Good that," Newt said. Albie's eyes returned to Thomas, narrowing. "A few weeks, you'll be happy, Shank. You'll be happy and helping. None of us knew Jack on first day. You neither. New life begins tomorrow." Albie turned and pushed his way through the crowd, then headed for the slanted wooden building in the corner. Most of the kids wandered away then, each one giving Thomas a lingering look before they walked off. Thomas folded his arms, closed his eyes, took a deep breath. Emptiness ate away at his insides, quickly replaced by a sadness that hurt his heart. It was all too much. Where was he? What was this place? Was it some kind of prison? If so, why had he been sent here and for how long? The language was odd, and none of the boys seemed to care whether he lived or died. Tears threatened again to fill his eyes, but he refused to let them come. "What did I do?" he whispered, not really meaning for anyone to hear him. "What did I do? Why did they send me here?" Newt clapped him on the shoulder. "Greenie, what you're feeling, we've all felt it. We've all had first day, come out of that dark box. Things are bad, they are, and they'll get much worse for you soon. That's the truth. But down the road a piece, you'll be fighting true and good. I can tell you're not a bloody sissy." "Is this a prison?" Thomas asked. He dug in the darkness of his thoughts, trying to find a crack to his past. "Done asked you 4 questions, haven't you?" Newt replied. No good answers for you, not yet anyway. Best be quiet now. Accept the change. Morning comes tomorrow." Thomas said nothing. His head sunk, his eyes staring at the cracked, rocky ground. A line of small-leafed weeds ran along the edge of one of the stone blocks. Tiny yellow flowers, peeping through, as if searching for the sun, long disappeared behind the enormous walls of the glade. "Chuck'll be a good fit for you," Newt said. "Wee little fat shank, but nice sap when all's said and done. Stay here. I'll be back." Newt had barely finished his sentence when a sudden, piercing scream ripped through the air. High and shrill, the barely human shriek echoed across the stone courtyard. Every kid in sight turned to look toward the source. Thomas felt his blood turn to icy slush as he realized that the horrible sound came from the wooden building. Even Newt had jumped as if startled, his forehead creasing in concern. "Shuck it," he said. "Can't the bloody medjacks handle that boy for 10 minutes without needing my help?" He shook his head and lightly kicked Thomas on the foot. "Find Chucky. Tell him he's in charge of your sleeping arrangements." And then he turned and headed in the direction of the building, running. Thomas slid down the rough face of the tree until he sat on the ground again. He shrank back against the bark and closed his eyes, wishing he could wake up from this terrible, terrible dream. Chapter 3. Thomas sat there for several moments. Too overwhelmed to move, he finally forced himself to look over at the haggard building. A group of boys milled around outside, glancing anxiously at the upper windows as if expecting a hideous beast to leap out of an explosion in glass and wood. A metallic clinking sound from the branches above grabbed his attention, made him look up. A flash of silver and red light caught his eyes just before disappearing around the trunk to the other side. He scrambled to his feet and walked around the tree, craning his neck for a sign of whatever he'd heard, but he saw only bare branches, gray and brown, forking out like skeleton fingers, and looking just as alive. "That was one of them beetle blades," someone said. Thomas turned to his right to see a kid standing nearby, short and pudgy, staring at him. He was young, probably the youngest of any in the group he'd seen so far, maybe 12 or 13 years old. His brown hair hung down over his ears and neck, scraping the tops of his shoulders. Blue eyes shone through an otherwise pitiful face, flabby and flushed. Thomas nodded at him. "A beetle what?" "A beetle blade," the boy said, pointing to the top of the tree. "Won't hurt you unless you're stupid enough to touch one of them." He paused. "Shank." He didn't sound comfortable saying the last word, as if he hadn't quite grasped the slang of the glade. Another scream, this one long and nerve-grinding, tore through the air, and Thomas's heart lurched. The fear was like icy dew on his skin. "What's going on over there?" he asked, pointing at the building. "I don't know," the chubby boy replied. His voice still carried the high pitch of childhood. "Ben's in there, sicker than a dog. They got him." "They?" Thomas didn't like the malicious way the boy had said the word. "Yeah." "Who are they?" "Better hope you never find out," the kid answered, looking far too comfortable for the situation. He held out his hand. "My name's Chuck. I was the green beam until you showed up." This is my guide for the night, Thomas thought. He couldn't shake his extreme discomfort, and now annoyance crept in as well. Nothing made sense. His head hurt. "Why is everyone calling me Green Bean?" he asked, shaking Chuck's hand quickly and then letting go. "'Cause you're the newest newbie." Chuck pointed at Thomas and laughed. Another scream came from the house, a sound like a starving animal being tortured. "How can you be laughing?" Thomas asked, horrified by the noise. "It sounds like someone's dying in there." "He'll be okay. No one dies if they make it back in time to get the serum. It's all or nothing, dead or not dead. Just hurts a lot." This gave Thomas pause. "What hurts a lot?" Chuck's eyes wandered as if he wasn't sure what to say. Getting stung by the grievers?" "Grievers?" Thomas was only getting more and more confused. Stung? Grievers? The words had a heavy weight of dread to them, and he suddenly wasn't so sure he wanted to know what Chuck was talking about. Chuck shrugged, then looked away, eyes rolling. Thomas sighed in frustration and leaned back against the tree. "Looks like you barely know more than I do," he said. But he knew it wasn't true. His memory loss was strange. He mostly remembered the workings of the world, but emptied of specifics, faces, names. Like a book completely intact, but missing one word in every dozen, making it a miserable and confusing read. He didn't even know his age. "Chuck, how old do you think I am?" The boy scanned him up and down. "I'd say you're 16. And in case you were wondering, 5'9", brown hair. Oh, and ugly as fried liver on a stick." He snorted a laugh. Thomas was so stunned he'd barely heard the last part. 16? He was 16? He felt much older than that. "Are you serious?" He paused, searching for words. "How?" He didn't even know what to ask. "Don't worry. You'll be all whacked for a few days, but then you'll get used to this place. I have. We live here. This is it." "Better than living in a pile of clunk." He squinted, maybe anticipating Thomas's question. "Clunk's another word for poo. Poo makes a clunk sound when it falls on our pea pots." Thomas looked at Chuck, unable to believe he was having this conversation. "That's nice," was all he could manage. He stood up and walked past Chuck toward the old building. Shack was a better word for the place. It looked 3 or 4 stories high and about to fall down at any minute. A crazy assortment of logs and boards and thick twine and windows seemingly thrown together at random, the massive ivy-strewn stone wall rising up behind it. As he moved across the courtyard, the distinct smell of firewood and some kind of meat cooking made his stomach grumble. Knowing now that it was just a stick kid and doing the screaming made Thomas feel better, until he thought about what had caused it. "What's your name?" Chuck asked from behind, running to catch up. "What?" "Your name. You still haven't told us. And I never remember that much." "Thomas." He barely heard himself say it. His thoughts had spun in a new direction. If Chuck was right, he just discovered a link to the rest of the boys, a common pattern to their memory losses. They all had remembered their names. Why not their parents' names? Why not a friend's name? Why not their last names? "Nice to meet you, Thomas," Chuck said. "Don't you worry. I'll take care of you. I've been here a whole month, and I know the place inside and out. You can count on Chuck, okay?" Thomas had almost reached the front door of the shack and the small group of boys congregating there when he was hit by a sudden and surprised rush of anger. He turned to face Chuck. "You can't even tell me anything. I wouldn't call that taking care of me." He turned back toward the door, intent on going inside to find some answers. Where this sudden courage and resolve had come from, he had no idea. Chuck shrugged. "Nothing I say'll do you any good," he said. "I'm basically still a newbie too, but I can be your friend." "I don't need friends," Thomas interrupted. He'd reached the door, an ugly slab of sun-faded wood, and he pulled it open to see several stoic-faced boys standing at the foot of a crooked staircase, the steps and railings twisted and angled in all directions. Dark wallpaper covered the walls of the foyer and the hallway, half of it peeling off. The only decorations in sight were a dusty vase on a 3-legged table and a black and white picture of an ancient woman dressed in an old-fashioned white dress. It reminded Thomas of a haunted house from a movie or something. There were even planks of wood missing from the floor. The place reeked of dust and mildew, a big contrast to the pleasant smells outside. Flickering fluorescent lights shone from the ceiling. He hadn't thought of it yet, but he had to wonder where the electricity had come from in a place like the Glade. He stared at the old woman in the picture. Had she lived here once? Taken care of these people? "Hey, look, it's the green bean," one of the older boys called out. With a start, Thomas realized it was the black-haired guy who'd given him the look of death earlier. He looked like he was 15 or so, tall and skinny. His nose was the size of a small fist and resembled a deformed potato. "This shank probably clunked his pants when he heard old Benny Baby scream like a girl. Need a new diaper, shuckface?" "My name's Thomas." He had to get away from this guy. Without another word, He made for the stairs, only because they were close, only because he had no idea what to do or say, but the bully stepped in front of him holding up a hand. "Hold it there, Greenie," he jerked a thumb in the direction of the upper floor. "Newbies aren't allowed to see someone who's been taken. Newt and Albie won't allow it." "What's your problem?" Thomas asked, trying to keep the fear out of his voice, trying not to think what the kid had meant by taken. "I don't even know where I am. All I want is some help." "Listen to me, Green Bean." The boy wrinkled up his face, folded his arms. "I've seen you before. Something's fishy about you showing up here, and I'm going to find out what." A surge of heat pulsed through Thomas's veins. "I've never seen you before in my life. I have no idea who you are, and I couldn't care less," he spat. But really? How would he know? How could this kid remember him? The bully snickered, a short burst of laughter mixed with a phlegm-filled snort. Then his face grew serious, his eyebrows slanting inward. "I've seen you, Shank. Not too many in these parts can say that they've been stung." He pointed up the stairs. "I have. I know what old Benny Baby's going through. I've been there, and I saw you during the changing." He reached out and poked Thomas in the chest. "And I bet your first meal from Fry Pan that Benny'll say he's seen you too." Thomas refused to break eye contact, but decided to say nothing. Panic ate at him once again. Would things ever stop getting worse? "Griever got you wetting yourself?" the boy said through a sneer. "A little scared now? Don't want to get stung, do you?" There was that word again. Stung. Thomas tried not to think about it and pointed up the stairs from where the moans of the stick kid echoed through the building. "If Newton went up there, then I want to talk to him." The boy said nothing, stared at Thomas for several seconds. Then he shook his head. "You know what? You're right. You're right, Tommy. I shouldn't be so mean to newbies. Go on upstairs, and I'm sure Albie and Newt will fill you in. Seriously, go on. I'm sorry." He lightly slapped Thomas's shoulder and stepped back, gesturing up the stairs. But Thomas knew the kid was up to something. Losing parts of your memory didn't make you an idiot. "What's your name?" Thomas asked, stalling for time while he tried to decide if he should go up after all. "Gally. And don't let anyone fool you. I'm the real leader here, not the two geezer shanks upstairs. Me. You can call me Captain Gally if you want." He smiled for the first time. His teeth matched his disgusting nose. 2 or 3 were missing, and not a single one approached anything close to the color white. His breath escaped just enough for Thomas to get a whiff, reminding him of some horrible memory that was just out of reach. It made his stomach turn. "Okay," he said, so sick of the guy he wanted to scream, punch him in the face. "Captain Gally it is." He exaggerated a salute, feeling a rush of adrenaline, as he knew he'd just crossed a line. A few snickers escaped the crowd, and Gally looked around, his face bright red. He peered back at Thomas, hatred furrowing his brow and crinkling his monstrous nose. "Just go up the stairs," Gally said, "and stay away from me, you little slint-head." He pointed up again, but didn't take his eyes off Thomas. "Fine." Thomas looked around one more time, embarrassed, confused, angry. He felt the heat of blood in his face. No one made a move to stop him from doing what Gally asked, except for Chuck, who stood at the front door shaking his head. "You're not supposed to," the younger boy said. "You're a newbie. You can't go in there." "Go," said Gally with a sneer. "Go on up." Thomas regretted having come inside in the first place, but he did want to go talk to that Newt guy. He started up the stairs. Each step groaned and creaked under his weight. He might have stopped for fear of falling through the old wood if he weren't leaving such an awkward situation below. Up he went, wincing at every splintered sound. The stair reached a landing, turned left, then came upon a railed hallway leading to several rooms. Only one door had a light coming through a crack at the bottom. "The changing," Gally shouted from below. "Look forward to it, shuckface." As if the taunting gave Thomas a sudden burst of courage, he walked over to the lit door, ignoring the creaking floorboards and laughter downstairs, ignoring the onslaught of words he didn't understand, suppressing the dreadful feelings they induced. He reached down, turned the brass handle, and opened the door. Inside the room, Newt and Albie crouched over someone lying on a bed. Thomas leaned in closer to see what the fuss was all about. But when he got a clear look at the condition of the patient, his heart went cold. He had to fight the bile that surged up his throat. The look was fast, only a few seconds, but it was enough to haunt him forever. A twisted, pale figure, writhing in agony, chest bare and hideous. Tight, rigid cords of sickly green veins webbed across the boy's body and limbs, like ropes under his skin. Purplish bruises covered the kid. Red hives, bloody scratches. His bloodshot eyes bulged, darting back and forth. The image had already burned into Thomas's mind before Albie jumped up, blocking the view, but not the moans and screams, pushing Thomas out of the room, then slamming the door shut behind them. "What are you doing up here, Greenie?" Albie yelled, his lips taut with anger, eyes on fire. Thomas felt weak. I want some answers," he murmured, but he couldn't put any strength in his words, felt himself give up inside. What was wrong with that kid? Thomas slouched against the railing in the hallway and stared at the floor, not sure what to do next. "Get your one cheeks down the stairs right now," Albie ordered. "Chuck'll help you. If I see you again before tomorrow morning, you ain't reached another one alive. I'll throw you off the cliff myself, you got me?" Thomas was humiliated and scared. He felt like he'd shrunk to the size of a small rat. Without saying a word, he pushed past Albie and headed down the creaky steps, going as fast as he dared, ignoring the gaping stares of everyone at the bottom, especially Gally. He walked out the door, pulling Chuck by the arm as he did so. Thomas hated these people. He hated all of them, except Chuck. "Get me away from these guys," Thomas said. He realized that Chuck might actually be his only friend in the world. "You got it," Chuck replied, his voice chipper, as if thrilled to be needed. "But first, we should get you some food from the fry pan. I don't know if I can ever eat again. Not after what he'd just seen." Chuck nodded. "Yeah, you will. I'll meet you at the same tree as before. 10 minutes. Thomas was more than happy to get away from the house and headed back toward the tree. He'd only known what it was like to be alive here for a short while, and already he wanted it to end. He wished for all the world he could remember something about his previous life. Anything. His mom, his dad, a friend, his school, a hobby, a girl. He blinked hard several times, trying to get the image of what he'd just seen in the shack out of his mind. The changing. Gally had called it the changing. It wasn't cold, but Thomas shuddered once again.